Hi everyone, and welcome back to our video lecture series for EEE 13. In this video, we'll be taking a look at your first C++ program. So to start off, let's open up a text editor. So in this file, we have the C++ version of the classic first program. So each one of these lines is an instruction that we want the computer to execute. Let's take a look at each of the lines in detail. Starting with line number 9. So this line contains the keyword cout, end line, and a string, hello world. So this is a message that prints hello world to our terminal or computer output. So all of our strings, that is sequences of characters that are side by side, are enclosed in double quotes. So this cout keyword here stands for our character output stream. Wherein if we want to display any number of characters in our command line, we would pass these to the character output stream so that it will display on our terminals. Over here we have another keyword which is read as endline. This specifies to the output stream that at the end of this particular sequence of characters, you'll be printing a new line, or what happens if you press enter in a text editor. Now after the endline character, we have this double slash. So this section of the code is what we call a single line comment. It's not an instruction to be read by the computer, and everything that is after the double slash is ignored and isn't executed. We place comments so that when we share our code to other programmers, they can more easily understand what exactly we want our program to do. So this at the top is another comment, but instead of spanning just a single line, we have these delimiters represented by the slash and asterisk to denote a comment that can span multiple lines. Now, what about lines 8, 10, and 11? So, each of our programs in C++ will be enclosed by these three lines. So what's happening here? This is what we call the main function, which is the primary body of any C++ program. So a function in C++ has this structure. So every C++ function has four parts. So it has a return type, in this case the integer return type, which specifies what kind of result the function returns once it's executed. Here we have the name of the function, which serves as our identifier and is what we use if we want to call our function elsewhere. We have these parentheses, and when we define other functions, we can place inputs to our functions as parameters between these parentheses. And we have the body of a function enclosed in the curly braces to indicate the statements that we want to execute within the function. We'll talk more about functions later on, but suffice it to say that the main function is what our C++ compilers will look for whenever we want to run any piece of C++ code. Now, what are these two lines here? So this hash include keyword is a directive which instructs our computer to include certain libraries defined for the C++ programming language. Here we include the IOStream library, which is used for our input and output of any program. And this includes keywords such as our cout and endline discussed earlier. Now, we specify that we're using what we call the standard namespace because certain keywords such as cout and endline can actually be defined in different ways for different libraries. And if we want to use cout without this line, we would have to actually type the following. To indicate that the behavior we want comes from the standard namespace. So now that we've explained all the lines of our program, let's try to run our C++ file in a terminal. So here I'm using the Windows terminal to compile our C++ file. So as you can see, in this folder, we have our Hello World file defined with the .cpp extension. So we use file extensions to let our computer software know that we're running a C++ file and not, say, a C file or a MATLAB or Python script. And typically, if we have C++ files, we'd use either the .cpp extension or perhaps the .cc. Now, when we run a C++ program, we use what we call a compiler. So, this G++ is a C++ compiler. It's a piece of software that reads our C++ files, which are essentially just lines of text which are easy to read for programmers. And it takes these lines of text and translates them into commands that the computer can actually execute. So to compile our C++ programs, we type the compiler name, the file name of our C++ file, the -o flag to indicate that we want to save our executable with a certain file name, and our executable file name. So if we run that, the compiler processes our text file, and once we're done, we have a new executable file. So if we're using a Unix-like compiler, such as in Linux or Mac OS, you would typically run executables or binaries using the // command. So if we saved your file as hello world, then you would run it like this in a Linux or Mac OS terminal. But since we're using Windows, we can just type the name of the file and it'll run. So there, we have our first running C++ program that outputs hello world to the command line. So our compiler can also do things such as detecting if there are any errors. So one of the things about C++ is that every one of our lines has to be terminated by a semicolon. If we save a program without the semicolon, then our compiler would return an error. So if I try to run that again, you see that the compiler detects this error and it expects a semicolon before the next line. Or if we removed the namespace line as we explained earlier, the compiler would also detect a number of errors, indicating that our cout and endline keywords should be defined as standard cout and standard endline because they're only defined for behaviors in the standard namespace. So when you write your own programs, don't be afraid of the errors that pop up. They're there to inform you what went wrong with your code and help you debug so that you can create working lines of code. So that's all for this video. In the next one, we'll be talking about our basic data types in C++ and how to declare and initialize our variables. I hope you found this informative, and I'll see you in the next one.